Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Den Haring and this is Fish Den 365. Recently I've been getting some comments asking about what kind of fishing line that I use, how I use fishing line, and just for more detail about when to use which types of line. And really, when you talk about fishing lines, it's really easy to go down a serious rabbit hole with all the different options that there is out there today. So today's video is going to be all about fishing line. I'll share with you characteristics of the lines that I like to use, and then I'll share with you the actual lines I use and what applications I use them for. So when it comes to fishing line, I like to keep it as simple as possible. And even that, it can get to be overwhelming for some fishermen out there. But we're going to simplify this for you today. And if you are new to fishing and you want to know more about what lines are best for the applications, then this is something that you're going to want to see. And if you've been around a while and understand the different characteristics of fishing line, there may be something of value in this video for you as well. So there are three major types of fishing line, different chemical compositions of line. One is braided line, the other is fluorocarbon line, and then the third major one is monofilament. Now there's other types of fishing line, there's these copolymers and this kind of thing, but they're usually set up to be used in very specific situations. So, and I find that they really don't have much of an advantage, if at all, compared to the other three major categories because of the improvements that have been made in recent years. So basically it's braid, fluorocarbon, monofilament. And so to get a better understanding of how these lines compare to each other, I've created a table for us to look at and compare. So you'll see that this is a fishing line comparison table. You've got all these characteristics: stretch, diameter, abrasion resistance, castability, memory, visibility, sensitivity, durability, whether it floats or sinks, and common applications. And then the three lines are braided, fluorocarbon, and monofilament. We're just going to go through this whole table because it's important to know these things. It'll help you choose which lines to use for your specific applications. So when we look at stretch, when we look at braided line, it's very low stretch. It provides excellent sensitivity because of that. Fluorocarbon has low to moderate stretch, and monofilament line has high stretch. So there's quite a bit of stretch. And there's pros and cons to this, to each one of these characteristics. And the line high stretch allows you to absorb shock, so it's less likely that you'll have broken line when you're fighting a fish. Also, if you're fishing a crankbait, for example, it'll allow the fish to get that crankbait in its mouth better before you set the hook, because the line actually stretches and the bait can get into the fish's mouth a little easier. So each one of these things has its own benefit. Low stretch, the great benefit of that is you can feel everything through it. So if you're using braided line, you have much better feel for what's happening at the end of your line. And of course, fluorocarbon is somewhere in between. Diameter, this is the diameter of the line. Braided line has the smallest diameter for its strength. Fluorocarbon is thicker than braided line for the same strength, and monofilament is generally the thickest of all for the exact same strength. Abrasion resistance. There was a time when braided line was not good with abrasion resistance. It was terrible, in fact. So if you're somebody who tried braided line 20 years ago or more and thought, this stuff sucks, I'm not going to use it anymore because it breaks so easy, you may want to look at it again, because now, because of the improvements over the years, it really is a very good abrasion resistance line. And fluorocarbon is too. It's excellent for abrasion resistance. Monofilament a bit less. It can also be, depending on what type you buy, it could also be a little tougher. Like, for example, Berkley has XT, which stands for extra tough line, which has more abrasion resistance than XL, which stands for extra limp, which casts better. All right, castability. So because it's got a very thin diameter and slick texture and no memory, the braided line casts excellently. You can cast braided line farther than the others. Fluorocarbon is a bit stiffer than monofilament, so it doesn't cast quite as good. Monofilament casts quite well.
The only problem with monofilament is it does have some memory to it, so it's prone to coiling. And that's the next characteristic here. Memory, very low memory in braided line. You won't get coiling there. There's moderate to high memory in fluorocarbon and high memory in monofilament. Visibility, braided line is extremely visible. It's easy to see, often requires a leader because of that. Fluorocarbon has the same light refraction as water, or very close to it, and because of that it's nearly invisible underwater. And then monofilament is somewhere in between. Moderately visible, varies by color. Sensitivity, nothing more sensitive than braided line. It's very high sensitivity, you can feel everything. Fluorocarbon has good sensitivity, you can feel things pretty well through that, not as good as braid. And then the sensitivity of monofilament is less than the other two because it has more stretch. Durability, the braided line is extremely durable. You can use it for more than a year, 2-3 years. Fluorocarbon line is quite durable, but it does degrade with UV exposure. And then monofilament line, being a nylon type of line, does degrade, especially if it's in sunlight or in water for some period of time. So it will not hold up as long or as well as the other two. Braided line generally floats. There are new braided application lines now that sink. They're quite new, but most braided line floats. Fluorocarbon line sinks, so it's good for subsurface lures, and monofilament line tends to float as well. So then here's some applications for each. Braided line, heavy cover fishing, frogging, fishing toads, that kind of thing. Flipping, deep water jigging. If you're using fluorocarbon line, great for clear water because it's invisible. Great for finesse fishing. It's a great leader material. Monofilament is a good general purpose line. It's good for topwater because it floats, and for trolling. So these are some of the characteristics I think are the most important characteristics of all three fishing lines, and they tend to help you understand when and where to use them. Okay, so now for a little bit more about what I do. I like braided line a lot. The one thing I don't like about braid is it's highly visible, but you can get around that. The thing about braid is it's just so sensitive that once you use it and you feel things through it, you don't want to not have that advantage that it gives. It's harder to feel what's happening with fluorocarbon, and even more harder with monofilament. So for that reason, I use braid on almost every application that I do. I just use a leader in front of it, and that leader is either fluorocarbon or monofilament, and that depends on what I'm doing. There are occasions where I use straight braid. If I'm fishing a frog or a toad in heavy cover and slop, I'll use 50-pound braid straight to the bait. Don't think it creates much of an issue because the fish can't see what's happening with all that slop anyway. The other thing about braid, the big advantage is the castability of it. I can just throw baits further on it, whether it's a spinning rod or a bait caster. It just throws those baits farther because there's no memory, there's no coiling, and there's no stretch in the line. It just does a better job at casting as well. So when I'm not frogging or fishing real heavy cover, I'll use either a fluorocarbon or a monofilament leader. If I'm fishing anything that goes down and sinks into the water column, I'm choosing fluorocarbon. So if I'm pitching and flipping, for example, I will have a fluorocarbon leader on the braid. Typically when I'm pitching, flipping, or even casting a jig a long distance, I'm using 20-pound braid, and then I'll choose either 20 or 15-pound fluorocarbon. And I'll go over all the different brands that I like to use here in a few minutes. If I'm throwing something on the surface, like a topwater lure, a Zara spook, or a Sammy, then I will use 20-pound braid, but I'll use a monofilament line because the monofilament is a bit, it floats, and like something like 15 or 12 or 17-pound test mono, it sets up well on the surface of the water. So if you have fluorocarbon line, it tends to sink. So if you have your topwater lure and your line tied to it and you get a belly in that line, it can get caught on the hook of the lure when you're walking the dog. Less likely to happen with line that floats, like monofilament. So now I'll go over some of the brands that I like. When it comes to fluorocarbon line, I only use one brand, and it's Seagar. They make great line. They make really high quality stuff. I used to use other brands, and sometimes they would fail. They would break when they shouldn't have.
This is Seaguar Invisex. I use that quite a bit. I'll use that from a 6-pound test all the way up to 20. Their blue label line is extremely good too. It's actually better than Invisex, but it's more expensive, and I find that there's really very little need for that when I'm using Invisex because of the quality of this is so good. Now, Seaguar just came out with a new line called Basics, B-A-S-I-X, and I've used that in 10-pound test and like that as well. It's a little cheaper. It's 100% fluorocarbon, but it's anything that these guys do, Seaguar, has always been high quality from my point of view. When it comes to monofilament line, I use a number of different Berkeley lines. So Berkeley has a couple of different choices here. This is XT, so that stands for extra tough. It's abrasion resistant. It's a little stiffer than XL and Sensation. So I like it when I'm fishing at topwater. I like a stiffer line. It's less likely to get hooked on the belly of one of the hooks on the belly of the lure. So I'll use XT when I'm fishing topwater lures. Sometimes though, if I'm using a small topwater lure, something very small on a bait finesse system or even a spinning rod, then I like this XL line. It casts a little better. It's got a little bit better. It's more manageable than the XT. And on a smaller bait, it does a little bit better. It gives it a little bit more lively action. And of course, I'm using that in a smaller line diameter, smaller pound test, because I'm using, in this particular case, smaller baits. So it might be 6 or 8 pound test in those applications where I'm using something like a real tiny popper or the Megabass Karashi, for example. When I use these lines, the monofilaments, I always try and choose the green lines when I can, because I think that just hides better under the water. It just has that subtle green color, and I just think it's harder to see underwater. This is another line made by Berkeley that I like. It's also monofilament, and it's called Sensation. It's got a little bit of best characteristics of everything. It has a little less stretch than normal mono. It's strong, it's pre-abrasion resistant, and you can feel things a little bit better through it. So oftentimes I'll use Sensation in place of these other two lines across all the pound test ranges. Now we come to braided lines. So I use 2 braided lines. I like Spiderwire Stealth and I like Power Pro. And I'll use them across the range of anything down to 10-pound test all the way up to 50 or 65. 10-pound test I'm using on very light spinning rod, spinning gear, or bait finesse situations. This is 10-pound test in a pink color on the Power Pro. It casts extremely well. It's very manageable, and I like this on a spinning rod or on bait finesse. I use this interchangeably with the Stealth Braid. This is Spiderwire Stealth. I find that these two are very close to each other, and I'll use one or the other, whichever is available or cheaper at the time. There is one that I will completely avoid, however, and that is this Spiderwire Ultracast. I've had bad experiences with this, and I'm not the only one. I've read others have had bad experience with it too. And what happens with the Ultracast is if it's on your reel for any period of time, it begins to like dry rot, and when you set the hook, it breaks. And I've had this happen several times. So I won't be using that anymore. But the Stealth is good, it's strong, it holds up, and so does the Power Pro. Now the nice thing about braided line is it is more expensive, but it ends up being cheaper if you use it the way I do. I like to put, I actually measure how much line I put on my reel. So I'll put 75 yards of the braided line on, and you can get one of these little measuring devices that the line goes through and it tells you how many feet. That's 225 feet. And then I'll just put backing on that reel to take up any needed spool space so that I fill up the spool. That way, if I buy 300 yards of a particular line, I know I have 4 reels that I can fill. And then I'll keep that on there for at least 2 years. What I'll do is I'll use it for 1 year, and then I'll reverse it the second year so that the fresh line underneath is used. And if I don't use it a lot, if I'm not fishing with that particular reel a lot, I might use it for 3 or 4 years. But if I use it a lot, then after the second year, I replace the line. But that way I save money because I'm not going to cast further than 75 yards. So I think that's good as far as how much to put on the reel. And then I'll just use cheap monofilament line as the backing, but it does save a lot of money. And because the braid is good, you can just use it the next year as well. Finally, you might be wondering, well, what kind of connection knot should we use when we're connecting braided line to fluorocarbon or monofilament? I used to use uni to uni knot, a double uni knot. I found something better. It's called the red Phillips knot. I'll leave a link for how to tie it here that Steve Rogers does a very good video on. The red Phillips knot is every bit as strong as the uni. I think it's actually stronger from my experience. It's easier to tie, and the uni to uni is easy, and this is why I use this knot. It's a strong knot but easy to tie. You want to have a knot that you can tie very easily so that you don't have to if you're out there in waves and wind, you don't want to be fumbling around with a very complicated knot. And you don't need it. This red Phillips knot is very strong, very good knot, and I use it across all the different ranges of pound test. Never had an issue. It just works very well. Now there is one thing I do when I make my knot from my leader to my braid. I actually put a little dab of head cement on that knot. I'll take a toothpick, get a little out of the bottle, and put it on. And I'll show you what head cement I'm using right here. What that head cement does for me is it strengthens the knot a little bit more, and it also allows it to pass through the guides a little easier as well. It does not have any adverse effect on the line. There's no chemical reaction. It doesn't weaken the line, but it does strengthen the knot and allows me to cast a little bit further. Well, that's it. We've tackled the fishing line. I hope this helps you decide what line you should buy and how you should set your outfits up for your particular fishing situation. If you found the video helpful, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 10,000 subscribers. I'm somewhere around 5,700 and some, and so I got a ways to go. So help me out there if you can. Love to hit 10,000 as soon as possible. Until next time, be safe out there. Hope to see you on the water. And as always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.